Okay, the map you can see up on the screen, that's a map of our geographical area that we operate. You can see we got one sow farm in Nebraska, and then any county where you see a pig, that's a county where we have sow farms. And any county that's shaded, that's counties where we have grow finish barns located. And so you can see we have our sow base located primarily in some of the most swine dense counties in Iowa, some of the most swine dense counties in the U.S. And that's about 240,000 sows is what we have in Iowa. And so unfortunately, I don't know if I have a lot of good tips, but I have at least some experiences I can share with you guys. Just talking a little bit about our gilt management program. So all of our gilts would get their core vaccinations outside of PRRS. But then when it comes to PRRS vaccine, typically what we do is we'll give all the gilts are receiving a modified live vaccine as a young gilt. We don't want our animals to be PRRS naive in Iowa. We just have too much disease pressure. We can manage our way through the productivity and the losses of a PRRS outbreak better, we feel, if we have a vaccinated animal. And then we also vaccinate our gilts with Prevacent in the sow herds. Usually the gilts get vaccinated at entry into the sow farm, and then a couple times a year we'll utilize that vaccine. And then we try to grow our gilt, I say, in low swine dense areas, and I use that term relatively. That'd be kind of the southern Iowa areas where we have our gilts that we grow out. So we still have gilt grow outs that break with PRRS, unfortunately, but we try to keep those animals away from most of our sow herds and most of our commercial grow finish. And also, there are other producers that have grow finish in those areas, but a lot lower swine density. At least there's not several barns within 2 miles. And then our breeding GDUs are kind of our safest location. So the majority of our sow farms, over half, would take a bred gilt into those farms. So a gilt is somewhere around 10 weeks pregnant. And so we breed those gilts off site, and they go to a safer location, the more isolated areas, or they're in filtered facilities. And we do not do any routine live virus inoculation of our gilts. You can see just I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but just about every parameter you can think of, from mortality to selection rate to percent HNS, farrow rate, born alive, everything's worse on those gilts if they're exposed to live virus intentionally. And so we avoid that. We do use vaccine on all of our gilts. Naive herds are going to be impacted much more severely by PRRS outbreaks, and so we try to keep our animals from at least being naive. So historically in Iowa, in our high swine dense areas, the PRRS break rate is 86%, and so that's about every 14 months on average. In my experience, herd closures, they've extended since processing fluids started. I don't think we do anything a lot different than anybody when it comes to herd closure or McRebel type processes, but it seems like the 44 to 45 week average has been what we've seen rather than a 30-week type average. I would say once we complete that elimination, the odds that we don't find that wild type back in that sow farm, I'd say within the next 6 to 8 months, is about 75 to 80% odds of true elimination. And so when you think about that, when you have a herd that's going to break with PRRS every 14 months, it's going to take you the better part of a year for a closure, and the success rate, the impact of that closure on parity structure and the reduced throughput doesn't make a lot of sense in our situation for those farms where we don't think we can keep them negative. And so some of the strategies we've taken is, number one, trying to keep virus out. So we've done a lot of investment in the positive pressure filtration and biosecurity measures. And then the other thing is, how are we managing endemic farms with vaccination, gilt entry, what we call mini closures. And so from a biosecurity standpoint, I won't go into a lot of detail on the things we do, but we try to focus on the main ways that we think disease gets into a herd. And so we have all of our dead removal would be segregated, either compost, incineration, or we have an internal dead truck that would pick that up and get washed and baked every day. And I would control the route for that truck. Animal movements, we really focus on the trailer sanitation. All of our movements would be trailers that are washed and baked, disinfected and baked. Really try to segregate people and support staff, people that don't work between grow finish and sow farms. And then supply entry, UV chambers, D&D. And then the one thing I'll say is with animal testing, of course, that's always a big risk area. And I always say, the Big 12 football program of testing every player the day of the game isn't very realistic. So we always take a risk every time we move animals into a herd. And so we try to have a very robust testing program. We have an internal PCR lab, and we test multiple times during the week when we're moving, and we test, I would say, a larger set of samples than most would. And then finally, we use a feed mitigant, and that's not just for PRRS, but other things like PED. African swine fever is one of the biggest reasons, kind of insurance policy for foreign animal disease. And then talking a little bit about our positive pressure filtration, we've made a lot of investment in this over the last 6 years. We've got 10 GDUs, 9 new sow farms, and 21 remodeled sow farms, and we're remodeling another one this year and hopefully 2 more next year, trying to continue to push the system that way. But we've been able to reduce our new virus introductions by over 4.5x what they were. So we can get long stretches of time. We can get these herd closures, longer herd closures, eliminations to pay off. And just a little schematic of how those work. You can see there's attics. There's an extended roof line over what was there, and then a dormer built onto the side of the barn. And so there's attics, fans up in the attic between the old roof line and the new roof line. And basically that's sucking air through a filter. So there's a negative pressure space in that dormer, and then from there the exhaust shutter and the inlets control the airflow from the attic into the rest of the farm. For endemic farms, like I said, we're rarely trying to attempt virus, or we don't think we can keep them negative for very long. And so in those farms, we're doing quarterly whole herd vaccinations. We do rotate with a couple products, just trying to help get a little more broad spectrum. We've started using some killed vaccine. Don't know, we think there's some good data on reasons why it should work, and so we're starting to use that a little bit, trying that. And then really in these situations, our reproductive loss is minimal. Occasionally we'll get a little blip, but really don't have much problems reproductively. Especially if we're bringing open gilts into a farm, even with bred gilts, we can sometimes be a little bit problematic. But reproductive losses generally aren't very big. We try to do these mini closures. We'll put 10 to 20 weeks in at one time, and oftentimes then we'll spray all of them on the nose with the virus. And we do that if a herd starts acting up or acting more unstable. And so that's kind of what we would call a mini closure. We're not trying to eliminate the virus, but we're trying to get to the status where we're not finding it on processing fluids, at least on a routine basis on processing fluids, or it's hard to find the virus in the farm. But our biggest concern in these farms is what we call an endemic farm, a farm that broke with PRRS more than 16 weeks ago. We're not trying to eliminate it, as we see a lower born alive, about 4/10 of a pig, and then about a 1.5% higher wean to market mortality on average. And that's what I've got in terms of how we manage PRRS in these areas. And they always seem to break right in a very tight window in the fall, and a very tight window in the spring. I think last year we had a couple breaks, and they were within a week of each other in the spring, and then in the fall it was like a week before to a week after Thanksgiving, and the weather was just like it is in this room today, Chris. Perfect for virus movement. So, all right.